we thought we had big victories, but
I do remember going. I should really figure out what year it was, but I do remember going with my parents to a big protest in D.C. because I grew up in Maryland. I did go to.
I think that was 2003. Yeah, I went with
I went to that one
sisterhood
too.
group.
I was at that one also.
Yeah,
I went to one way before that.
So everyone, we are streaming, just so folks know.
Thank you.
Edward?
Thank you.
At our service last night, I saw that Alex Lasry was on. I almost wanted to say something about the Bucks.
Sharon Markowitz is his wife. Gail Adams' niece.
Yes, that all makes sense because Lauren Markowitz, who was on last night, told me that Rabbi Adams was her uncle.
Eli and Linda, you're on separate computers.
Well, it doesn't work well being too close. Eli's invited. We're not home, and we're having I know this sounds like nothing to people there, but we're having a major desert windstorm, and our Wi-Fi has been all day. So, but we went out for a walk, and we're blown around. I know this sounds like nothing, and I apologize. But,
no, the windstorms in California desert windstorms in Palm Desert can be horrible.
It was, stuff came out of my hair when I watched it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I'm also tired of the walk.
Huh?
Well, you all don't know me. Linda and Eli are my best friends, and I'm in Denver, and it's 1. So I don't care about your damn wind.
Yeah, there are rabbis there. There's a rabbi here.
It's not that much warmer here.
We understand. We have a balmy 3.
But the wind chill that's putting it at -9.
And snow all day.
That tonight will be -21. And if it's that bad in Denver, I can't imagine what Milwaukee is like. It must be hideous.
We came in from shoveling snow and could not feel our fingertips.
Oh, I bet. My dog keeps
been going on for a week. The cold's been going on for a week.
Yep, you're right.
I have no sympathy for you. We're in Little Rock and we're freezing.
Bonnie Nickel from Little Rock, yes. But when it snows or ices in Little Rock, it is worse than anything in Milwaukee. I literally had to abandon a rental car in Little Rock.
A moment of Jewish geography. Do you know Gary and Carol Wisely in Little Rock?
Of course.
Yes.
Gary's my first cousin.
Oh, really?
That is the most Milwaukee thing.
But they live in Denver. But Bonnie's kids live in Denver, Gail.
Really?
My daughter and son-in-law are in Denver. Julie and Steve Felsen.
The name sounds familiar, but I don't think I know them.
Yeah, well, they live in off of Quebec in Centennial, and he's in IT, and she sells real estate, and they have 2 daughters, college age.
Nice, very nice.
Yeah, well, I will tell Gary and Carol you said hello.
Please do. I talked to them 2 weeks ago for a surprise birthday party for Gary's niece in Kansas City.
I hope we're post surprise party as this is streaming online.
Yes.
That's fun. Is it time to go? I don't know. We're going to keep on playing Jewish geography, Linda.
Are we ready to begin Havdalah?
It's your show.
Panther, you good with that? Okay. I will, I got everything where I need it, I think. Turn off my light. Ooh. Now I can't find my match. And we start our Havdalah, the end of the week, the beginning of the new week, as God did, creating light.
Ya ya la 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 ya 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 la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya 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 la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la la Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen ya 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 la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la la Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim borei minei v'samim Ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la la Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei haesh borei meorei haesh ya 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 la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la ya la la ya la la ya la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la la Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam המבדיל בין קודש לחול, המבדיל בין קודש לחול. יאללה, יאללה, לה, 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 לה. יאללה, יאללה, לה, 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 לה. יאללה, לה, 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 יאללה, יאללה, לה, יאללה, לה. Yala yala la 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 yala yala la 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 yala la 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 yala la yala la yala la 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 yala yala la 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 yala la 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 yala la yala la yala yala la 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 yala yala la 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 yala la 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 yala la yala la Eliyahu hanavi Eliyahu hatishbi Eliyahu 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 hagiladi במהרה בימינו יבוא אלינו עם משיח בן דוד, עם משיח בן דוד, אליהו הנביא, אליהו התשבי, אליהו, אליהו, אליהו הגלעדי, המבדיל בין קודש לחול, חטאותינו ימחול, זרענו וכספנו ירבה כחול, והכוכבים Shavua tov, 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 a good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. Shavua tov.
Shavua tov. So at this point, we are so excited to turn it over and learn from Linda. So Linda, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. Shavua tov, Xinjiang Hotel, Gongxi Fa Sai. Happy New Year, and may you prosper. Thank you all for coming. I very much appreciate this opportunity, and I want to thank Rabbi Boralski and Susan Cosden, our Director of Lifelong Learning, and Andrew Appel, our Executive Director, and my tech support tonight, who will facilitate the presentation. Andrew, the first slide, please. Okay. This is the year of the ox, which is an animal respected in China for being strong, steady, hardworking, reliable, and modest. One thing the Chinese New Year has in common with the Jewish New Year is that being lunar, per the old saying, they're either early or late, but not necessarily ever on time. Next slide, please, Andrew. Traditional New Year food. Ashkenazi Jews eat kreplach in chicken soup on Rosh Hashanah, and Chinese eat dumplings for Rosh Hashanah, for New Year. Well, maybe on Rosh Hashanah too. Other communalities are love for family and the value for education. There's also the Chinese respect for people who do well in business, and it's one of the ways they respect Jews. We have to explain sometimes that this is a stereotype that isn't always the best for Jews, but they think it's a good thing. Next slide. The relationship between Chinese and Jewish people goes back to at least the 10th century in a city named Kaifeng in Henan province. Back then, it was a very important city, and at one time a Chinese capital. Its prominence was achieved by its location as a destination on the Silk Road. You can see it's sort of in the middle of China. And it's supposed that Jewish traders on the Silk Road married Chinese women, and that's how Chinese practice came into place in Kaifeng. It's officially endured into the 1800s, by which time intermarriage again to Chinese diluted the Jewish practice. They lost their synagogue, they lost Torah scrolls, some of which had to be sold to raise money for the community. In the past decades, aided by some US organizations and individuals and people in Israel, there are today some people who consider themselves still descendants of the Kaifeng Jews. Some have gone to Israel, where of course they're made to convert if they're going to be recognized as Jews. But some have stayed in Kaifeng, and some of these organizations had started Jewish schools, practiced again more activities. And for a while, the Chinese government tolerated this, even permitted it, blessed it, probably for tourism reasons. However, the last few years, there's been a clampdown, and the Kaifeng Jews don't want the attention of well-intentioned Jews from other places. Also, Judaism is not one of the 5 so-called recognized religions of China, which are Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, Catholicism, and Protestantism. Not that China looks so favorably on those either, especially Islam. Next, please. We were in Kaifeng in 2002 when we lived in Denver and led a Jewish tour of China. On Teaching Torah Lane, we visited the home of an old woman, supposedly the widow of a Kaifeng Jew, who proudly showed us her collection of Jewish artifacts and pictures of Israel, mostly on calendars. We also sat in the stone shell of the last former synagogue, which was really built over a cistern to a cesspool. The rabbi with us on the trip, our friend, Milwaukee native and Emmanuel born, Steve Foster, commented that where there were Jews, there had to be both a synagogue and a cemetery. He told this to our Chinese national guide who traveled with us, as we were a large enough group to qualify for such service. The guide told the bus driver to find it. So we embarked on what seemed like a wild goose chase through neighboring villages into a field. It was getting dark, but somehow we ended up finding this monument that was erected by a family that had moved to Israel. Obviously, it was not an ancestral gravestone, but maybe it really was the location of the Jewish cemetery of Kaifeng. Who knows? Next, please. Here are photos of artifacts of the Kaifeng Jews and photos of some of the last members of the community. Some of these photos are from an exhibit owned by the Sino-Judaic Institute. I used to be on its board, and we brought the exhibit to El Verno College about 15 years ago. This is a stone bowl used for washing before entering the synagogue. Next, please. Children probably in the 1800s outside the synagogue. Obviously, this was in the later years of the Kaifeng community after photography was invented. Next, please. This is the intersection with Teaching Torah Lane on the left, where the old widow lived. On the right is a drawing of a Torah case from Kaifeng that's in the rounded style typically used by Sephardi Jews. Next, please. Here's a picture of the last synagogue in Kaifeng, literally, on a cistern with a cesspool of the river next to it. Inside the current building on the site is the cistern that leads down there. Kaifeng is on the Yellow River, and periods of great prosperity brought by the commerce on the river alternated with disastrous floods that brought the city to its knees repeatedly. Next, please. Here is a community family. I believe some of these later photos from the 19th century were taken by Canadian clergymen who visited Kaifeng. Next. This is a modern photo in a hutan, a courtyard space, where apparently the current so-called Kaifeng Jews were having services and gatherings. Below are the signs that have been taken down since the Chinese government's latest ban on their worship and on Jewish celebrations. You see the caption, Bitter Winter. Next, please. Beyond Kaifeng, Jewish life in China began about 1840, when the first Jews, originally from Baghdad, arrived to do business. They had been stalwarts of the centuries-old Iraqi communities that began after the major diaspora known as the Babylonian exile. Jews and Jewish life, practice, and scholarship thrived despite periods of intolerance and persecution. Families with famous names such as Sassoon, Kaduri, Hardoon were fabulously wealthy and always on the lookout for new opportunities. By the 19th century, they were British citizens allowed to trade opium by England's victory in the Opium Wars. Some had already settled and opened business outlets in India, mainly Bombay, but China was new and fertile territory. To their credit, they moved beyond opium and invested in the development of the city of Shanghai. They also formed a substantial Jewish community there with ritual practices more Sephardic than Ashkenazic. They were prominent in hotels and other real estate, as well as utility companies and financial services. They also built beautiful synagogues, a Jewish hospital where Jewish doctors could practice, and the general infrastructure of a Jewish community. Shanghai was a very cosmopolitan international city known as Paris of the East until World War II and the Communist Revolution. Famously, such writers as Noel Coward and Ernest Hemingway wrote and partied there, and others just partied. The Jews owned some of the premier establishments hosting them. This slide shows a 1920s view of the Bund, which is still the main street of commerce overlooking the river in Shanghai. It looks a little different now. There's a walking promenade, but with some of the very famous buildings that still exist. The top right is the patriarch David Sassoon and some of his sons still back in Baghdad. I don't think he personally did not go to China. And the sketch below are on the left, Ali Kaduri and Sir Victor Sassoon, who were representatives in the 20s and 30s of these families and who really did so much of the business. And of course, they were rivals too. Next, please. Here's what's been known since the communists took over as the Peace Hotel. When Sir Victor Sassoon built it, it was called the Cathay Hotel. This is a modern view of the building on the outside and the way it's been beautifully restored with a Milwaukee Jew looking in the lobby. The top green portion housed Sir Victor's penthouse and a fabulous ballroom. It's been restored, obviously. It was very shabby when we first saw it in the early 2000s, and it's now run by the Fairmont chain, so it's quite lovely. Next, please. Here's a photo of an old dining room in what's still called the Astor House Hotel, also built by a Jew, Edward Isaac Ezra, whose empire and life flamed out in an early age. I fictionalized his family in my novel on China. Next, please. Here's the outside of the Astor House in modern day Shanghai. Next. On top are older and more recent shots of the Ohel Rachel Synagogue. This was built by the Sassoons to honor their mother, Rachel. It was probably the central synagogue of the Baghdadi Jews. Now it's part of the Ministry of Education and hard for visitors to get into and pretty much prohibited to be used as a synagogue with some exceptions. It's an on and off diplomatic situation that varies from year to year. The photo on the bottom is the home of Silas Hardoon, and it's now known as the Children's Palace, a place for education and entertainment. Next, please. This is Embankment House, built in the 1930s, also by Victor Sassoon, and once known as the #1 apartment building in Shanghai. Some Jewish refugees from the Nazis were housed there, thanks to Sassoon, when they first came to Shanghai. Next, please. Here are the Beit Aharon Synagogue, also a Sephardi synagogue on the top, and the Kaduri School, where Jewish students studied before and during World War II. Next, please. This is the conference hall on the grounds of the Xinjiang Hotel, formerly known as the Grosvenor House, which was a hotel and apartment complex also built by Victor Sassoon. In this building, the agreement for diplomatic relations between China and the United States was signed in 1972 during President Nixon's famous visit, reestablishing relations. Next, please. After the Baghdadis came the Ashkenazic Russian Jews. Escaping Tsarist pogroms, the reason many of our grandparents came to the United States, the wave started in the late 1880s. More came in the wake of the Russian Revolution after World War I. One city in which many Russians settled is Harbin in the north, where Russia had a concession to build the China Eastern Railway, and some Jews worked on that project. Others went into related businesses such as steel, mining, etc. Fur trading and other merchant businesses were common too, especially given the very harsh climate. The Russian Jews were very cultural and prominently engaged in theater and music. Ultimately, Harbin was in the path of the first Japanese invasion of China in 1931, and many Jews there moved on to Shanghai. There was a tremendous amount of brutality that the Japanese wreaked when they first invaded China. There was already considerable settlement of Russian Jews in Shanghai, and in addition to the Baghdadis. This is a shot of the two synagogues in Harbin that were known as the Old Synagogue on the left and the New Synagogue on the right, even though they were about the same age. Next, please. This shows the inside of the New Synagogue, which also houses a museum. On the bottom left is a display in the museum of old furniture and artifacts from Harbin Jewish homes, and also a government sign about the architecture and heritage of Jewish life there. We've met an Israeli ex-journalist who married a Chinese woman professor in Harbin, and he's been very instrumental in working with the Chinese government there in preserving and glorifying the Jewish history of Harbin. It really is quite amazing. A Jewish center has been restored, etc. I think it's a provincial thing rather than a national thing. So it's been much more successful than in other places. And he's very persuasive. Next, please. The picture on the left is a statue in the Jewish Museum depicting the musical tradition in the Jewish community. On the right, there are shots of the Jewish section of the municipal cemetery. This is a very rare thing in China. In 1958, the Chinese government decided to move the Jewish cemetery from its previous location to the new municipal cemetery. It probably appears that only a portion of the graves were actually moved. But later, after the cemetery was desecrated during the Cultural Revolution in the 1970s, the government restored it, partially with the help of donations from families who had relatives there. The dark marble monument on the bottom is the grave of the father of former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who was from Harbin. Next, please. Here is a collage in the museum about Solomon Skidelsky, a tycoon in mining and other businesses, with a picture of his home in Harbin. When I coordinated the Jews in Modern China exhibit in San Francisco, I collected photos and mementos from families in the Bay Area with China histories and got to spend some time listening to their family stories. One of the people I met was this man's granddaughter. Next, please. In Shanghai, the Russian Jews were similarly engaged in merchant and retail business as they had been in Harbin, and they were culturally active, also as they were in Harbin, bringing Yiddish literature and theater as well as Zionist organizations to China. The Russians lived chiefly in the leafy French concession, my absolute favorite place to walk in Shanghai. Russian Jews also settled in another city, Tianjin, which is closer to Beijing. The photo top left is the Jewish Club, the former Jewish Club, now part of the Shanghai Conservatory of Music. Below is the Jewish Hospital, now the Eye and Ear Hospital. Both are in the French concession. Next, please. The third major wave of Jews in China were the European refugees escaping the Nazis, who gave Shanghai its nickname, the port of last resort. This is perhaps the best known story of Jews in China, although not all that well known sometimes. When the United States and just about everywhere else closed its doors to Jewish immigration, Shanghai was a place Jews could go without visas. And it was not that the Chinese government at the time, run by Chiang Kai-shek, was intentionally welcoming. In fact, when a Chinese diplomat in Vienna, Dr. Ho Fong-shang, gave out exit passes to Jews, he lost his job. But Shanghai by the late 1930s was an open city, somewhat controlled by the Japanese and generally chaotic in terms of who came and went. At first, the Jews from Europe could live anywhere they could afford. Plus, the existing Baghdadi and Russian Jews helped with a social safety net from being there so long. But after Pearl Harbor, when Japan became the ally of Germany, the Germans wanted their former Jewish citizens who had gone to Shanghai exterminated. The Japanese, to their credit, compromised by ordering all European Jews who had arrived in Shanghai after 1937 into a ghettoized area of the city in the very crowded district of Hongqiu. It wasn't a ghetto surrounded by walls as in Warsaw and elsewhere in Europe, but housing within a very confined small area where the living conditions were far from ideal and for many way beneath what they had ever experienced before. The Japanese controlled entry into the other parts of the city for work or other purposes. And there were numerous instances of unfair regulations and cruelty, but basically most survived, which differentiated them from the people they had left in Europe. Many succumbed to illness, and a few and more to an unfortunate American bombing raid on Hongqiu just before the end of the war. But being Jews, they made do. They opened cafes and restaurants, sponsored musical and theater events, published newspapers in several languages, and made a life. This photo is the Shanghai Jewish Refugees Museum, which has become a landmark in Hongqiu and built alongside the Ohel Moshe Synagogue, which was an older Ashkenazi synagogue. And this is run and owned by the Chinese government. Next, please. On the left is a monument in a city park to the Jewish refugee experience. And on the right are pictures of the people who lived it. Next, please. Little girls being little girls. In general, most of the refugees didn't report much blending with the Chinese. Both peoples were struggling to survive. But here's a wonderful example of some blending. Next, please. Here is a street scene in Hongqiu. The Russian Jews in Shanghai were the most free during this period as they were stateless, so they were very helpful in providing supplies and other help to the Europeans in Hongqiu. The Baghdadis, despite their wealth and long established life there, were British citizens, so they were enemies of the Japanese. Many, even from the big name families, were confined to prisoner of war camps after Pearl Harbor. Ultimately, the average Chinese suffered in Shanghai more than any of them. After World War II, though, as the communists were coming to power and Shanghai became even more chaotic and uncertain, the Russians, who had no passports, had the most problems getting out. And newfound Israel was practically the only place they could automatically go. The Europeans finally had some luck in other places, such as the United States, Australia, and even back in Europe, as well as Israel. The Baghdadis mostly fled to Hong Kong, which was still, of course, a British colony then, and they also had investments and relatives there. Some descendants of those famous families remain there today, and some are once again invested in the Chinese economy as it has evolved since the Communist Revolution. Next, please. Today, the Jews in China are all expatriates from other places, including Milwaukee, who are there to work or study. Among them are a considerable number of Israelis and French. Jewish life is as active as individuals want it to be. Chabad first opened in Shanghai about 25 years ago, and it operates several centers in that city, as well as other places in China. Beijing Chabad opened later, and now it's a large center. This is Chabad in Beijing, where there's a kosher restaurant as well as assembly space and space for classes and other activities. On the right, you can see one of the services Chabad provides, that is ordering Passover supplies for pickup by the locals. That, I have to admit, is the only time we've ever been there. Next, please. And here is a Milwaukee Jew with Rabbi Shimon Freundlich, the head of Chabad in Beijing. Next, please. Kehilat Beijing is a liberal community that started way back in 1979, and it still exists today. We were there for Rosh Hashanah in 2019. Now there's also liberal Kehilat Shanghai. Both have obviously more liberal services and activities, including religious school when their populations are that age. The Kehilat Beijing used to have a softball team known as the Pinyin Minion that somebody that some of you know played on. Next, please. And here are our favorite Jews in China. Personal privilege. Next, please. Next, please. And here are scenes from our family's Jewish life in China. Amy and Jonathan's wedding in 2003. Mira at Kehilat Beijing on Rosh Hashanah when she was under 2. One of our many seders in China, and the PJ Library can now come to our grandchildren in China. Next, please. Finally, here are a few of the many books on the Jews of China. These represent the different modern experiences as well as some Kaifeng history that's included in my novel. I'm currently reading what's probably the latest, The Last Kings of Shanghai, about the Baghdadi families. It's terrific. Deborah Strobin and Rena Krasno were authors I knew in San Francisco, and their memoirs as Viennese refugee and Russian Shanghai native, respectively, are very interesting. That's it. Shishi Toda Rabah. Thank you very much. If people have questions, I don't know if they're in the chat or if I'm going to find people's hands up, whatever, but thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you for inviting me, Linda. I invited Dale Renee.
Thank you.
Bravo, Linda.
People from other places.
Are there
Bravo, Linda. Bravo.
Are there questions?
Thank you. Thank you. Are there questions?
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
When's your next
Friends.
book coming out, Linda?
I don't know. This winter was supposed to be about doing some research and thinking about something else, but not yet. I'm enjoying reading. I like the reading part. I don't love the writing part. So we'll see. Thank you all for joining though.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you for inviting us.
Any relationship between the person in the book you're reading now, the author is Krasnow, and Gloria's family?
I don't think so. Rena was literally born in Shanghai, and I don't think she ever had any relatives in Milwaukee that I know of. I knew her quite well, but I don't think she had any relatives in Milwaukee.
I think the spelling is the same, correct?
Right. But her husband was also a Russian Jew that lived in China.
Were there a lot of Jewish or German Jews that settled in Shanghai during World War II?
Well, they came as refugees. They didn't stay. Really, people left because of the communist revolution, and things were getting, less comfortable in Shanghai than they were before the war. There was tons of inflation, lots of war, civil war, and they sort of felt that, getting out was the best thing they could do. But some Germans, as we all know, even went back to Germany. But they were there when they needed to be there. And the Chinese government, even though the current Chinese government has absolutely no relationship to the Chinese government that was then, it takes pride in having welcomed the Jews and having given them a home of last resort. And they have China has a good relationship to Israel. There's really no anti-Semitism in China. So we'll take what we can get.
Wasn't Michael Blumenthal, the former Secretary of the Treasury,
Yes.
a refugee to Shanghai to escape from the Holocaust?
Yes. He was. There have been movie producers, a lot of people who became rather well known late in life, and in the Bay Area we knew a lot of them, and they really became, wonderful citizens. They started their own synagogue in San Francisco, and they were very lucky. Yes, Peter Max, the artist, absolutely, Bill. Thank you. So, yeah, it really was a fortunate thing, no matter how it happened. because they couldn't go anywhere else after a certain point. Anybody else?
Can you hear me, Linda?
Yes.
Mackie Gaberman was an AZA advisor for Madison AZA. He originally had come from, escaped the Holocaust and went to Shanghai and eventually came to Madison, Wisconsin. And his son Barry was president or alcalde of Madison AZA chapter.
Yeah, yeah. Diane knew Mackie, yeah. That period of AZA and BBG was a little ahead of my time, but yes, there's still a woman named Edith Schaefer who survived, who was a Shanghai Jew. Mitchell. Mitchell's iPhone raised his hand.
Mitchell, you're muted though. We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, is Vidal Sassoon a member of the Sassoon family in China?
I think he is from that family, but I think from the British branch. You know, the Sassoon family is huge, and they scattered all over. Some, you know, skipped the China, Hong Kong, India part, and were mainly in England. And there was the poet Siegfried Sassoon during World War I. Interestingly, Sotheby's recently had an auction of Sassoon-owned ritual artifacts, and they were both, you know, they were from Britain, they were from Europe, and they were from, you know, the old Sephardic artifacts from Iraq. I imagine they went for fabulous prices, but they're very much in the world.
Okay. Also, does Chinese New Year always correspond to Rosh Hashanah?
I honestly don't know. I don't think so.
I just wondered because they're
think
both the Hebrew calendar, Chinese calendar,
The lunar calendar.
They're both lunar calendars, so I don't know, you know, if it's necessarily the New Year. In China, they call it the Spring Festival, the celebration, and it really lasts for about 10 days to 3 weeks, depending on which area of the Chinese world you are. I mean, and farther away in Hong Kong and even Malaysia, where there are overseas Chinese, it goes on and on and on. And in Malaysia, it sometimes intersects with Ramadan, which is an interesting combination. Bonnie, yes, I think I did talk to Lee Rennell one of the times we were in, when I was in Little Rock.
Jimmy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
She's still.
I don't want to talk.
Anybody else? Well, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda.
Shavua Tov, and
Shavua
stay
Tov.
warm, and
Stay warm.
we miss you, but we'd miss you if we were home.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
your Milwaukee weather has arrived in Dallas, so what can I tell you?
Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Family.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Cancer. Susan, whoever takes it away, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Nice to see familiar faces.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing together people from all over the country, it looks like.
I did.
Nicely done.
Number of Jonathan's relatives.
His father.
Father, his cousins, and the other Sherry Goldberg from New Jersey, who babysat for him, I think.
Definitely.
Thank you
I
all.
still say I'm the first Sherry Goldberg.
Oh, well, the other Sherry Goldberg, we'll have to.
She married in.
Okay.
I have one quick question, Linda. What year was it? And I remember at the Jewish Museum, you brought Chayalei Walkins. In what year did the Mir Yeshiva relocate from? I think it was from. Yeah, to Shanghai.
Sometime in 1939 or 40. Actually, the Mir Yeshiva got out through passes from the Japanese diplomat Sujihara. They came to Shanghai. They were based at the Beit Aharon Synagogue, the large building that I showed you that was not named after the Sassoon's mother. And there are some pictures of them literally studying in the synagogue. And Hyla from Chicago is the daughter of the Mir Yeshiva rabbi, and I think she came to speak at the Jewish Museum in Milwaukee during the Mahjong exhibit, which was the most China-related exhibit the Jewish Museum has had since I've been back in Milwaukee, I think in general. So, and she was very good. I mean, her experience was very interesting. So anyway, thank you all so much. Synagogue people, up, I assume. My friends don't wind up so fast.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Everybody
Bye.
be healthy. Thank you, Eli.
Sherry Goldberg, how are you?
Good. Is that Susan?
Yes.
Switchbook. Hi. I saw Roz next to you.
Yes,
How
she
you doing,
is.
Roz? Let me see.
Okay.
How are you? You look good. How you feeling?
I'm well.
Good. Good. Glad to hear.
How are you and your
Shavuot tov.
family?
What's that?
How are you and your family?
My mom just passed away, so yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. But we're doing okay.
I'm so
But
sorry.
it's good to see you.
Good to see you. Mwah.
Are you enjoying Milwaukee?
Loving it.
Good.
Loving
Good.
it.
I'm glad to
loving it.
hear.
I
I
love
did too.
everyone in Jersey.
Yeah, I know. Well, we're all over the place now.
I know. I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But it's good to see you both. Take care. Be well.
You
Take
too.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, all.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, everybody.